Hi there, I'm Andrew, you're watching ThatGamerAjax, and welcome back to the Tabletop. Now, today is a video that I'm very excited about. This is one that I've been yearning to play Fantasy Age for a while, and while I haven't still had a chance to play it yet, I did want to share some of my early impressions of checking this game out after a couple of people said this is one of those underrated fantasy games that should be up there with the likes of Pathfinder and D&D. So, let's go ahead and dive right on into this. Okay, so for those of you that might be unaware, Fantasy Age is a fantasy role-playing game that is designed by Green Ronin Publishing. Now, the game is a little bit more generic as a whole. It doesn't have an overly defined setting that you can get into, such as, the world of Glorion that is in Pathfinder, or, the Sword Coast from D&D, all of Faerun as a whole. It doesn't really have a setting like that, so going into this, you're probably going to have to create your own world. I know that they are making steps to be able to make this game a little bit more accessible and having its own functioning world to play in. And there is an introductory adventure that is in the game, so there is a little bit there, and it does give you something to do right out the gate. The way that the game plays as a whole is that you create your hero from one of four classes. There is the warrior, the rogue, the mage, and the envoy. So while these are, again, a little bit more generic from the start, you're going to have a lot of ways to build that character up in any way that you want. When you are making your checks, everything uses 3 6-sided dice, or 3d6. One of those does need to be separate, needs to be special, because that is your stunt die, because the stunt mechanic is the kind of bread and butter of the Fantasy Age system. The way that this works is that whenever you get anything that matches, right? So let's say that you roll those 3d6 and you get 2 4s, you are going to be able to generate stunt points, and that's where your stunt die comes in. You generate a number of points equal to the number that's on your stunt die. And the way that stunts work is that you use them in combat, exploration, social situations. There are different kinds of stunts for almost any kind of situation, and it just lets you do a lot of other things that you might not be able to. Some of them could involve, just doing extra damage. You could embarrass a foe. There are a lot of stunts that are listed in the book, and from there, you just kind of have a grand old fantasy time. I think that the game looks very interesting. I think there are a lot of pros already going into this. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about some of the strengths of the system. So, first and foremost, I think that customization is going to be key here. Now, you have 4 classes to pick from, sure, but every class has a wide variety of specializations that you get to choose from, and that's going to be kind of like what really helps define your character as you are leveling. You have a couple of tiers. You always start at the first one, and then at certain level points, then you get to advance to the next tier of your specialization. And some of these are open to multiple things. I've seen multiple instances where some of these specializations are open to an envoy and a warrior, for example, or you might have a warrior and a mage if you really want to play something that's a little funky. And I just think that's honestly like really, really cool. You have different focuses that your characters can take, and when I say that there are some very niche focuses for your characters in this game, like heraldry, for example, is something, you'll get a little bonus to that role when you are making a check involving that. But I just love the way that you can kind of like nitpick a little bit on like what your character is going to be really good at. So I think that is definitely something that is very strong for the game, just right out the gate. Another strength of this game, and something that I personally really enjoy, is the fact that it's pretty short as a whole. The core rulebook for Fantasy Age 2nd edition, which is what I managed to pick up, is 291 pages. That is everything you need with your GM advice, steps to make characters, adversaries, and a starting adventure. So while it might be a little light on some content, I can see that there is a lot that you're going to be able to do just right out the gate. You don't have to go and buy a bunch of other books to be able to complement this one. And when I mentioned the stunts that you can do at the very beginning of this video, I was not kidding. There are a lot of them, and what's great is that they are kind of a use it or lose it situation, so you are encouraged to use as many of your points as possible. You don't get to just hoard these up, because it's only available for the turn that you do this. And I love the fact that there are multiple ways to use them, and it's not just combat. So, like, I mean, even just looking at some of these combat stunts that are available, I mean, you have the ability to knock an enemy prone as part of your attack. You can pierce armor, because armor is a thing in this that does reduce the amount of incoming damage. It also does put some negatives on your character stats, so it's something to keep in mind when you're building a character. But I mean, it's great. I personally really like this. There are social stunts, exploration stunts, spell stunts for mages that you can do, and each of the different classes has their own unique stunts that they can deploy as well. And I will say, just looking at this, from starting at level 1, it looks like Fantasy Age characters are pretty beefy, all things considered. I mean, even a warrior starts with a base of 30 health. And granted, the numbers don't get quite as high as they do in something like D&D or Pathfinder. Like that is before adding in any additional modifiers. And what's I think is also kind of cool is that when you get later into the game, your health does start to kind of, you don't get any dice added to it. It's just going to be your constitution score, for example. I personally like that just because your character's getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and that by the time you're hitting, level 15 through 20, you don't really necessarily need all that extra health for pretty good reason. Also, another thing that I think is great about this game is the number of optional rules that are included with it. Some of these include like chase scenes, and it seems to do chase scenes really, really well from what I've been reading. Horror mechanics that are in there. If you want to go like a more cinematic thing, like there are ways to do that. That includes like instead of just using health, you have like fortune, for example. There are a lot of ways that you can play this game, and I definitely appreciate that. And there's a lot of good tips on like what to include for a setting as well. So I think that if you're looking for a generic fantasy style system, this is probably a good one that you should be keeping an eye out for. So let's go to what I think is some of the not so good based on my early readings of this game. So I do think that some of the explanations and some of the wording can be a little confusing, especially when it comes to leveling up. I had to look those over a couple of times. So for example, when you're making a character, you have primary and secondary skills. These are basically going to take your main attributes, split them in half, and then it's like these are your main ones, these are your secondary ones. On certain levels, you get to add bonuses to your primaries, and then you can add to your secondaries as well, which is great. I think that is an interesting way to do it. I just wish that the phrasing was a little bit cleaner, for example, and I mean, it took me probably a good four tries to be able to understand what that really meant. And I will say that when it comes to leveling up, you're not going to be getting near as many features as you do in something like D&D or Pathfinder. And I know I keep defaulting to those two. They are the other two big fantasy games that are in the space. And while that is a little bit of a bummer, I do think there are a lot of ways that you can flesh out your character through narrative mechanics, and there are a lot of additional traits that you can take on. It's just that you're not really rewarded for them outside of like going into new specializations, as an example. And if I remember correctly, that is something that you can do. So this is one of those games that you're not going to be getting like a lot of new traits when you level up, but you are going to be making a more defined character as you do so. And unfortunately, I really can't comment on how combat pacing goes. I do know that you get one major and one minor action, along with I believe you have movement, so kind of standard for fantasy games these days. But I will say that from what I've been reading, there is a bit of HP bloat, which tends to happen in games. I haven't had a chance to run this yet, so once I'm able to run this, I can give you a much better impression on how that really works. Overall, these are just very early impressions based on my reading. I do think that this game has a lot that's going for it. And honestly, the book is a lot of fun to read. I think there are a lot of good ideas that are here, and this is a game that I have wanted to check out and run for months now. So now that I have my hands on it, this is one that I'm really looking forward to. But I think that is going to go ahead and wrap this up. So this does seem to be a very solid, more generic fantasy role-playing game. Now, it might take a little bit more work for you to get something going, and you can always, add more to your world as you get there. And it does seem like there might be a little bit of confusion between like first edition and second edition stuff. It's all supposed to work together. I do know that much. But just something to keep in mind is that you're not going to be able to have like clearly defined campaigns like you do in Pathfinder or D&D or a wide variety of other games that are out there. So just keep that in mind if you decide to check this game out. But I always like to end my videos with a question. So have you played Fantasy Age? If so, what do you think about it? Is this one that you feel that people should be checking out? If not, why not? Have you even heard of this game, first and foremost? But go ahead and discuss in the comments below. If you like the video, give it that thumbs up. And if you want to see a little bit more about what I do here on the channel, maybe consider subscribing. But hey, till next time, I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.